holiday somewhere. So we wish her all the best on her holiday. So it's just me that you've got today. And to all of those who are new subscribers to Pour and Sip, please welcome. Please get involved with all your tasting notes, your comments, your questions to our guests. We have 3 wonderful guests lined up for you today for 3 of the drams that we're going to be trying. And just been told I'm live, which is good just now. I've been yabbing on for about a minute now, so hopefully you've seen that. Anyway, so please welcome to all of you. The order of proceedings tonight is going to be, we're going to start with a really exciting new whiskey, a blended whiskey called Storyman, which has got some stories, which I'm sure we're going to hear. Some more celebrity whiskey coming out. Then we're going to head over to Yorkshire, and we're going to be drinking the Filey Bay. And then we're going to have another interview. We're heading over to Craigellachie in Speyside, and for our last interview. And then we're going to be following up with the last 2 drams, which we won't be having interviews for, but I will be giving you my tasting notes and my opinions, a little tiny bit of information. As we always say, there's a lot of drams to drink tonight in 5. So, if you want to drink the first 3 drams that we are discussing more in depth, please do, and then save the last 2 for another time. Again, please do. Really, no pressure. You don't have to drink it all at once. And then we'll start with Wolfburn, and then we'll finish off with Macallan, which we've never had here on Pour and Sip. So that is quite exciting, I'm sure, for all of you to get a drop of Macallan in our boxes. So I think, without further ado, that is definitely enough of me. So I'm going to invite our first guest on, and please welcome Ben. How are you, Ben?
Hi there. You okay? I'm doing all right. I'm a little bit warm, as you've just said.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's filtering up north to Scotland as well. It is in London as well.
Yes, we'll give you some of our warmth. I'm sure you guys need it out there.
Yes.
So I think the first thing to talk about, we'll obviously get into the dram, the distillery as well, but I just want to talk about you for a little bit. How did you get into whiskey? How did you find yourself in your current role? And, what was your journey?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we've got some lovely stories, and my story is a bit of a up and down one. 22 years old, I'm from Birmingham, so big, massive city with lots of growth, lots of potential, lots of people. When you're in those kind of environments, there may or may not be a bit of opportunity for you to find certain avenues of work. So working at the airport, doing customer service, customer base, getting to know people, getting to know the products. Happened to be working in the liquor section, duty free, and then I started to move slowly but surely into the whiskey scene, which is, as you'll know, it's a more specialised, refined liquor as the most other spirits that you find out there. So for me, I started to learn about whiskey, started to read books about whiskey, and eventually started to drink the whiskey itself.
Started reading about it before you started drinking it. That's a really...
I know. I think it was more books were affordable than actual bottles. Yeah. I think that was kind of how it was at 22 years old. But once you could afford 1 or 2 bottles, they soon became your favourites. And then you just start to learn about why does this taste better than this? And maybe I prefer that, and perfecting and just dabbling in your
Sorry, Steve. Steve has just commented, we're going with the Storyman first. So this is what we're drinking currently in our first interview section. Anyway, carry on.
No worries. So essentially, so started drinking it. Then I got, how can I put this in a nice PG sort of format? I started drinking it a bit too much, and then all of a sudden then I wanted to work at a distillery. So I applied for pretty much every distillery that you could find that was closest to me, especially on a train line link, because I I couldn't drive at the time. And lo and behold, Annandale, just over the border in Scotland, just past Gretna Green, and it was fairly accessible. So I was invited up to an interview by our general manager and commercial director, David Hyde. He then took me under his wing, offered me a tour guide's role, which there was no official job going. I have to put it out there. I sort of sweet talked my way into it because, as you'll soon find out, I can talk and talk and talk and talk. And then he said, "Have you thought about being a tour guide?" I says, "I'll consider it." Put me on a train down after tasting some of the whiskies because I was falling asleep after the strength that it was when they gave it to me, which was about 60%. And 2 weeks later, they offered me the job, and I moved up with no friends, no family, no finances, just working hard, grafting hard, learning the trade, appreciating the whiskey that was around me, and then going further afield. So it's been a really, really beautiful journey. And I've now been working for Annandale for just over 5 years now.
Oh, cool.
And it never ceases to amaze me, the sort of good quality products that we can produce. And yeah, that's my story anyway.
Very nice. It's a great story, and that segues very nicely onto the quality produce that we're going to be drinking tonight. But it's first, I think it's before we just get on to the collaboration, I do think it's important we just discuss the distillery first and a little bit about the distillery and kind of that, the distillery character, where it is, a little tiny bit of history about it. So if you give us that as if you're on one of your tours, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So it'll say on most of our marketing and most of my uniform that if anyone is brave enough to catch me at most events. It was established in 1836 by the Donald family. Very, very small family of about 12 children, absolutely tiny family. And we were producing single malt peated whiskey for generations at that point. So up to about 50 years producing single malt peated whiskey for the local market. Once the consistency over the 50-year stretch from 1836 to about 1883, we were then bought out by an Englishman called John Sykes Gardner, who was a wine and spirits merchant from Liverpool, who sort of revolutionised Annandale in a way. We're still making single malt peated whiskey, but because it was the heart of the industrial era in the 1880s, it was kind of like rip out the old style water wheels that are powering the distillery, which were only producing a very tiny amount, to then introducing steam engine power, which meant we were able to produce a lot more. And therefore, because we're producing more, we're able to expand our reach, as it were. And obviously the transport links were obviously revolutionised during that 50-year stretch as well. He owned us from 1883 to about 1893, where we were then bought out by the man himself, which is, of course, Johnny Walker. Not part of Diageo at that point. Just we fell under the Johnny Walker portfolio, which was quite nice. And we were making single malt peated whiskey for about 30 years to be put into specific blends. So they would take our whiskey from the distillery, put it on a train to Kilmarnock, that would then be blended, put into ships, and essentially be exported all around the world. Which, if nothing else happened, that would have been the story of Annandale, and we would still be here today talking about how we are doing really, really, really well and be part of a huge portfolio. The problem is that as you go into the early 20th century, as many distilleries will know, many people will know, it was a very turbulent time for Scotch whisky, where breakout of the First World War, American Prohibition in the 1920s, so massive barley shortages, massive manpower shortages, and no exportation, kind of meant that Annandale was not sustainable at that time. So we decided to stop making whiskey in 1917, and because it wasn't viable, Johnny Walker decided to sell off all the assets, and whatever whiskey remained was soon carted off, and we were essentially abandoned in 1924. Now, that would normally be the end of it. And to be fair, for a long time, that was the end of Annandale. A lot of people had forgotten about us. We had fallen off the edge of the map, pretty much. That is until 2007, where there is a light at the end of the tunnel, where our current and new and current owners, Professor David Thompson and his wife and business partner, Teresa Church, they decided to purchase the distillery, which is from the local farmer, which is just situated behind our distillery by the Robertson family, for about £1.3 million as a purchasing price. And then over the course of 7 years, from 2007 to 2014, they refurbished it and brought it back to life. And we have started distilling again in late 2014, and we've been going ever since. So it's been you thought my journey was quite condensed. That is one hell of a journey to be condensed.
Your journey didn't span centuries, but anyway, yeah, so that's an awesome little bit of history for anyone who didn't know anything about Annandale's distillery. So that kind of brings us on to what we're trying tonight. So for anyone who doesn't know, this is a new blended whiskey. So it's really new, isn't it?
It's so new, it's not even available yet until next week.
Well, there you go. So guys at Pour and Sip, if you want to buy this, remember you will be able to buy this from the Pour and Sip store. I'll need to double check. Maybe you can get it now. Maybe you're going to have to pre-order it from our store. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, talk to us about the collaboration. How has this come about? Who approached who?
So the way it worked is, if you cast your minds back to the good old days of pre-COVID, we actually did a blend that was called the Outlaw King. Now, we actually got a deal with Netflix. So if anyone's ever seen the film Outlaw King on Netflix with Chris Pine and obviously James Cosmo, that is how he was sort of introduced to our brand in a way. So we did the premiere at the local cinema in Annan. We obviously did axe throwing and dram pouring and this whole gala day based around the distillery in collaboration with it. Obviously, there's lots of photographs, all the extras were involved. Chris Pine was currently doing Star Trek at the time, so unfortunately we didn't get to meet him. But so James Cosmo was then made aware of us via this route. So that's the kind of acorn, as it were. And we kept in touch. He is a massive fan of our distillery, is a massive fan of our concept and our ability to produce great quality single malt, single cask strength whiskey, which is what we predominantly do. But then we approached him in 2020 or late 2020, leading into 21, where we wanted to produce something for him, not just produce a blend and put his face on it or anything like that. We wanted to get to know James. We wanted to get to know like his history, his background, his experiences, his stories, as it were, and envelop them with our key blender, Keith Law, who I'll talk about if we have time, and essentially birth this concept of a blended Scotch whiskey. But what we wanted to do in comparison to Outlaw King as well, was we wanted to have a high malt content. So we wanted to be the sole proprietors. Like, we wanted to look after our own spirit and have our own control. I know a lot of places out there have blends that are made for them, and then it goes that way. But we wanted to put 85% or even closer to 90% of our Scotch single cask cash and whiskey into this blend and do it that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for anyone who doesn't know, James Cosmo is from Game of Thrones. If anyone isn't a fan and they didn't know who the particular celebrity is that we're talking about, what was his character again?
In which film? He was the he played the what's it called, the was it the I haven't seen it for years, but it's the Night Watch. He plays the Lord of the Night's Watch.
The Lord of the Night's Watch. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone who's not a fan, that is where this collaboration has come about. So lots of tasting notes coming in currently about this, and I've just been told from the Pour and Sip team that this is available and it is live. So if you do want to buy it, head over to our Pour and Sip store. So it's currently, I'm just going to read out a few tasting notes before even I get a chance to try this. So Your Uncle Vanya tart, powdered maraschino cherry sugar, if that's such a thing, such as salt, Malcolm Tucker, nose, citrus, light caramel, and waft of smoke. Green tea is green, very mild. Citrus, lemon on the nose, not getting much smoke though. Simon, citrus and fudge nose for me. Stuart McGregor, sweet apples, pears. Vanilla, white pepper. Anthony Mullins, I'm getting the sweetness of buttery fudge on the nose. Stuart McGregor, splash of water, increases sweet and fruit and also brings out the smokiness. So going back to what you were saying about the percentages, so this is a blend which is, were you saying about 80% of the single malt and then blended with, is it grain whiskey?
Yeah, so we decided to do a high malt content blend. So 85%, I believe, is our whiskey. And if you want the casks, I can give you them here. So we decided to what we did was, if I may just diverse a little bit. If anyone is familiar with who Keith Law is, Keith Law was the head blender for Diageo for about 25 to 30 years, give or take. He'll probably correct me on that. And essentially, we're quite friendly with him. So we asked him, we gave him close to about 200 to 300 different cask samples of various different ages, various different types, and various different ABVs, of course. So he then cherry-picked some unique sort of flavor notes and, obviously matching distillery characteristic with what we want, with what James wants, and blend it all together is obviously a very difficult thing. So what we've got here is we've got fresh and refill ex-bourbon casks from 2017 to 2016. So I believe this is I'm not going to put an age stamp on it, but it's a fairly young blend, but it's still a hell of a lot drinkable. And what people might be picking up on when we talk about luscious notes, we're getting things like apricots, creamy vanillas, obviously a hint of peat and pear drops. Those sort of greener notes are the distillery character pushing their way through, even through the wood characteristics. So light and fruity is what we always aspire to be at Annandale, but with a hint of smoke. And even more interestingly, we happen to put a bit of a STR red wine cask in there as well. So that's probably where the sweetness is sort of peaking from in a way. Now, we're doing 46% because at the distillery we don't want, and we don't actually have the facilities to do chill filtering. So 46%, it's high malt, it's high quality, it's 46%, it's drinkable, it's fantastically drinkable. This is actually I think it's the 4th time I'm trying it. I was involved in the process a little bit, but since James Cosmo, there's a lovely video there with James Cosmo trying like different samples and different batches and this and that, and he was going, no, that's not for me. And this is in front of Keith Law, where Keith is actually really, really nervous because he's prepared about 5 of these drams that are gonna go into Storyman, and we're gonna have like X amount of bottles of them. It's gonna really launch us into the stratosphere as a brand. And then about the 3rd or 4th one, I believe, he just went, that Storyman. It just sort of clicked for him. It really did. It's genuinely, it's lovely, it's drinkable, it's high quality, everything you want in a dram.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really lovely, subtle and kind of wood smoke on the nose that is, again, by the way, everybody, I've got a little bit of a cold that is just about to appear. So I might be slightly off, but that's really nice. But on the palate, the thing that really strikes me as soon as it gets just that really fudgy kind of vanilla creamy note, which is absolutely wonderful. And the lovely spiciness that lingers on the finish there with the wood smoke. This is kind of what a lot of people are saying. Your Uncle Vanya, yeah, agree that it gets more toffee-ish with time. Chris Leno, evening, all this is very smooth and creamy, has a nice sweetness and a subtle smokiness. Anthony Mullins can taste the peat, but it is so subtle with the sweetness still coming through. It is lovely. Simon, very clean on the palate, fresh apple and pear. Steve Coleman Williams, so palate notes, spicy custard cream biscuit with the smoky citrus hint in the finish. Clive Hampton, toffee caramel smothered in white pepper. Very drinkable. So those are great notes that are coming through from everybody. Are they hitting the mark for you there, Ben?
100%, probably more than 100%.
Yeah,
you know, it's one of those things that whenever I'm doing a tasting, and it's predominantly single cask strength stuff, one thing that is never it's recognized, but it's never actually talked about, and that is for me viscosity or mouth feel. The way it feels in your mouth, the way it sort of like it coats your mouth, rather than what's key with Annandale is that it doesn't hit you like a ton of bricks. It's very light, fruity, soft, gentle, rich. And then it has a lovely long finish that we go into. I mean, I'm looking at the legs on my glass. I think I see the legs on my glass there. But yes. They're so reminiscent of our cask strengths. So I don't know how we managed to achieve that, honestly, at 46%. But it's one of those drams that I, particularly because I've been there for 5 years, I'm extremely proud of, because, as I mentioned before, single malt, single cask, the first time ever doing a blend that we've done ourselves, with our own bottling facilities, with our own array of casks, and bringing somebody in who's an expert to confer with us and to nail down a recipe. It's something that I wouldn't say it brings a tear to your eye, but it might be forgiven for that,
And just as this is called Storyman, you said actually you offended James, and that's a story of that you had when you first met him.
Yeah, I don't know if he took offense to it. I would have been offended. As I mentioned, we had the launch of Outlaw King way back when, and he'd obviously came to the distillery, met and greet people. Now, we all did a big sort of cast photo and distillery photo, and everyone's involved and everyone's got cheering and stuff like that. And he just happened to be stood next to me. And I said to him, and bear in mind, he just released Outlaw King. And I says, "Oh, how are you, James? I haven't seen you since Troy. What have you been up to?" And then I just thought, he's in this film. Ben, what are you doing? The panic sort of set in, and he sort of went, yeah. That's very funny. I was going, yeah, please laugh.
Yes. Well, he did. We don't know if he was laughing out of politeness. Or,
I think he does.
Absolutely. So are there any more plans in the future for more stuff from this particular collaboration, or any other collaborations, or just what is in the pipeline next?
Well, never say never, obviously. James has a massive portfolio of adventures, stories, as we mentioned, hence the brand, that he could tell. And to be fair, with Annandale, we never say never, we only say how. Do we want to do a blend? Do we want to do a single malt, single cask with James Cosmo? It's not, anything can be thrown together. Anything that we feel is possible can be done, should we say. It doesn't matter how long it takes us, because we want to make things absolutely perfect. We will obviously be continuing with the Storyman blend. There'll be different batches coming up where we may change a few recipes, may change this, might take out STR, may put in some sherry. All these kind of things can be talked about, in the next coming years.
Perfect. Well, it's been absolutely lovely speaking to you, Ben. I absolutely loved that dram. A lovely summer dram, as Simon is saying here. And lots of great notes. Malcolm, apple tart tartan, smoke, plenty of black pepper, more smoke on the finish. And Ian Turner, smokiness, subtle, no sweet hint of smoke on the palate, and finishes superb with taste of red wine. So lots of great tasting notes coming in. And as we've said, this one is live now, so you can get it on the Pour and Sip store. So thank you very much, Ben, for sharing those stories with us.
My absolute pleasure.
Back on next. Maybe you can come with James next time as well.
We're best mates. We're absolutely best friends now.
Yeah. So see you soon. Thank you very much, Ben. Cheers.
Take care. Thank
you. What a lovely way to start the evening. More tasting notes coming through on this one. Anthony Mullins, I think my bottle was smaller than usual, as it has all gone. That would be great sitting in the sun dram. And Real Boinga, more vanilla on the palate, creamy sweetness, its smokiness stopped it from being too sweet, and yes, very smooth. So okay, let's move on. And who have we got next? Right. So let's please welcome Morgan from Filey Bay. How are you, Morgan?
I'm all right. Thank you, Andy. How are you?
I am not too bad, thank you. Where are we speaking to you from today?
From sunny Hunmanby,
okay.
In North Yorkshire, a mile inland from Filey.
Yes, Filey Bay. So, I mean, that's definitely not your house that you're sitting in the backdrop of your house. You're definitely,
Yeah. Well, as I said in the introduction when we just started speaking before, I've been in the still house all day, so it made sense to set up. It took a little bit of setup, but we're here and we're good to go, yeah.
Perfect. Right. Cool. So just talk to us first, again, similar to what Ben did, like a little bit about yourself and how you got into whiskey and your current role.
Well, I'm UK sales manager for Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery Filey Bay Whisky. My background actually lies in hospitality primarily. I've worked in and around restaurants and bars and hotels for about 15 years or so, maybe longer now, maybe close to 20 thinking about it. And then I've drank whiskey my whole adult life, even slightly before my adult life, I reckon. But I found myself with 2 young children and needed to change. Heard about a whiskey distillery in Yorkshire, didn't quite believe it, so made a beeline for Spirit of Visited. Visited the second time, and then third time met my managing director, Dave, who's one of the 2 founders of the company. He showed me around, showed me the stills, spoke to me about our field to bottle process, and really fell in love, really. And then next thing you know, it's, how can I be involved? They didn't put me straight into tours. So, I'm yet to actually do a tour here. They put me straight into production. I did a month of production with Joe, our whiskey director, and with Dom, our head distiller. Did a bit up at the brewery as well, making wash. And then the next thing you know, I was out in the wild, wild world selling whiskey and tasting and pouring and, learning as we go almost.
Lovely stuff. That sounds great as well. So talk to us about Filey Bay. How long have you been making whiskey for? Because obviously it wasn't just a whiskey distillery first.
No. Well, it's a little bit of a history lesson, so bear with.
Okay, there you go. This is your first tour. It's just an online tour.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I've done a few talks, believe it or not, in the last 3 years. I have done a couple of events and things like that. But we are a fully fledged field to bottle whiskey distillery. So the farm was actually taken over just after the Second World War in 1945. We've got a 600-acre farm, which is about 2 miles that way. And that's been growing barley since and getting it malted locally in Bridlington, which is, for those who aren't familiar, 5 minutes from where the distillery is. That was what we did until the late 90s, when we realised that the price of barley was drastically reducing. People were buying barley for as much. We had a lot more competition from the rest of the world. So we started looking at ways to diversify. And in 2003, we opened what we now describe as our sister company, which is Wold Top Brewery. So if you've got your own water source with 2 boreholes on the farm, so we've got chalk aquifers, our own water source, we've got our own barley, well, then you need to start looking at how to make more money from it. So beer was the first step. So Wold Top, for those who aren't familiar, every pub, bar, restaurant I've ever had involvement in, I've had Wold Top listed. They make very consistent, very excellent beer, consistency being key. That was the first kind of diversification. And then Tom and Dave, who are the 2 founders of the company, in 2016, they met playing rugby. In 2016, they started the idea of whiskey, of Yorkshire single malt whiskey. If you've got the raw materials, you've got everything on your doorstep to make world-class single malt whiskey. So we started that process. So we enlisted, I think similarly as Ann and Dale and a few others, we enlisted the help of the late, great Jim Swan. We got these wonderful Forsyth stills. Well, at least we got on a waiting list for them. It was a 5-year waiting list, which Jim helped to make go away, which is great. And we started distilling in June 2016, producing a light, fruity spirit style, non-peated, no peat whatsoever. Light and sweet and fruity was the goal, with Jim's assistance. And we've been laying down 14 casks on average a week since. So obviously then October 2019 is our first release. Went like that, fully bourbon matured, light, sweet, fruity, delicious whiskey. And then, of course, March 2020, world stops. And so...
Timing, eh?
Yeah, well, it's been a double-edged sword in truth, because although you'd go, it actually gave us, we're independently owned, we haven't got a board of directors, we can be quite light on our feet in decision making, but equally, we're not in any, to do anything desperately quickly. So it actually gave us a bit of time to make a bit of a plan. We released 2 new whiskies during the lockdowns, as it were, which were very successful. And now we've come out the other side of it. And for the last 3 years, we've really been grafting at shows, tastings, trade customers to try and get more liquid on lips. And obviously that's the power of this evening, really.
Absolutely. So talk to us, it says especially on your website as well how important, the field to bottle process is. And it's done the Yorkshire way. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, please? And kind of how important the field to bottle process is. How is this achieved? Is this through the barley grown from local farmers? And, how are we achieving this at the distillery?
Yeah, no, valid question. I should start by saying we are desperately proud in Yorkshire. We are desperately proud folk, so forgive that. When we say field to bottle, the major point of difference is the fact that we're not buying it from local farms or even pairing or partnership or collaborating with local farms. We are the farm, Andy. We have a farm. We plant the seed in the ground ourselves. Obviously not me. I've got quite soft little hands, but the business I'm proud to be a part of. So we farm, we're no-till farming entirely, meaning not ploughing the land between harvests of barley. We're planting cover crops. We're doing things as sustainably as possible because we own the farm and we don't want to turn it into a dust bowl. We want to keep it for the longest period possible. When it comes to whiskey, the importance of actually planting the crop and growing the crop yourself, getting it malted with people we've worked with since the Second World War, under our specification, and then doing everything ourselves on site, it's consistency and control. They're the 2 biggest points. Consistency of the same blank canvas from which you can produce the whiskey, in a sense of the barley, and control that with it, aside from the malting. And truth is, Munton's maltsters in Bridlington are just far superior to us. They've been doing it for 300 years. We'd be doing it for about 5 if we had a go. So everything else is done on site. And that's what we mean by field to bottle, the whole process from putting a seed of barley into the ground to having a glass of whiskey, we like to have complete control of. So consistency and sustainability are the 2 kind of key words in field to bottle production.
Yeah, that's really interesting to notice. I mean, there's a lot more distilleries trying to say it's really good to be seeing a lot more. We're talking more about eco and sustainability. And the environment. So all of these things are super duper important. What was the influence of Dr. Jim Swan? Like now, can we, the late Jim Swan, may rest in peace. But what is his influence? We talked about the stills. What does this mean? Considering the production process.
Well, we're not governed by the Scotch Whisky Association, I should start by saying. I think the marketing term we use is we respect tradition but do things our own way. So we're absolutely not standing here saying English is great, Yorkshire's great, Scotch isn't. I mean, without the Scots, we wouldn't be here. Certainly, Jim Swan, as most will know, is a Scotsman. Our stills are Scottish. We've worked with Scottish distilleries until we started making whiskey from a barley sales through the maltsters. What influence Jim Swan had was massive. I mean, those who aren't familiar, the guy's a consultant. He's opened Cavallan. Well, he's been involved with Cavallan, Annandale, Lindores Abbey, Kilhoman, others, Milk and Honey. There's quite a few. And basically, he said to us, or to Tom and Dave, the founders, what kind of spirit do you want to produce here? What's the goal? And the answer was light, sweet, fruity, accessible, new make spirit. We wanted it to be full of those tropical notes. We wanted loads of pineapple. We wanted loads of passion fruit, green apples. He was excited by the fact we had our own barley, of course. And so, yeah, the influence is relevant to fermentation. We ferment for 72 to 96 hours, and that's actually done at the brewery, which is one of the things we can do here. So we're producing an 8% wash that's absolutely full of that, banana bread fruity flavour, almost like a wheat beer flavour. From a distillation point of view, I don't want to move the laptop I've got in front of me because it'll mess things up, but we've got two beautiful pot stills. We've got a 5,000 litre and a 3,500 litre pot still, obviously copper. But then if you can see behind me here, we've got a rectifying column as well. So long and short, if the spirit is distilled solely through pot in a manner that it would be a traditional Scotch single malt, the ABV of the new make 73% alcohol, or the new make spirit 73% alcohol, full of flavour, loads of fruit flavour, loads of tropical fruit as you'd expect from that style of spirit. But importantly, it's got loads of that oily mouthfeel. Ben was talking about mouthfeel and viscosity, and I think the Jim Swan thing is partly influenced there too. I hope I'm correct in saying that. So yeah, that richness which is coming through the pot distillate is really creamy. For the other 6 months, for 6 months of the year, we just distill through here. I hope that wasn't too loud.
That was such a beautiful sound. I want you to do it again. I think everyone.
Shall I do it again? That's a lovely noise for you all.
Really?
Yeah. I'm doing a good job of hiding how hot it is in here. These are only turned off about an hour ago. So yeah, for 6 months it's pot distilled new make spirit. For the other 6 months, we're redirecting the spirit to go through the rectifying column. It doesn't have its own heat source. The heat source is coming through the coils in the pot still. So with that, we're getting lots more copper contact with 4 extra plates of copper. We're getting an 86% new make that's putting a lot more legwork in to do that. In that example, that extra copper contact's pulling away more of the dark flavours, allowing for more fruity esters to stand out and taking away from some of that oily mouthfeel. These two new make spirits are matured separately, and they're brought together when we come to make a batch of whiskey. And all of that process through distillation was Jim Swan. That was his thing. He said, why don't you try it this way? And that's what we did. The other influence from Jim Swan is STR casks. We have an STR finish, and similarly, shave toasted recharred Rioja. That's a Jim Swan nod, and it's actually unavailable at the moment in the UK market, at least direct. It might be available in a few shops. I think it'll still be available through Pour and Sip, but that's actually my favourite of the kind of core release whiskies we've done.
Awesome, that's great stuff. So talk to us about this dram that we're drinking. This is the flagship that we're going for tonight. So talk to us about this particular. There are loads of tasting notes coming through, but I'm going to read those out after we've just spoken about a little bit about the dram itself.
Lovely, yeah. So with regards to that difference in distillate, the ratio with the flagship is roughly 70% spirit that's gone through this lovely pot still. 30% has made its way through that rectifying column too. It's fully bourbon matured in the same style as our first release was. It's matured solely in Old Forester casks from Kentucky. The The goal of it is we're trying to create, well, to coin a term, our flag in the sand, our house style. You know, the gist of it is the spirit should be fruity and light, and as I say, green apples, lots of tropical fruits, banana bread. But obviously then the casks are going to elevate that fruitiness. You're getting the caramel and the fudge and the vanilla you'd expect from, just so everyone knows, I have already been jamming this whiskey. That vanilla caramel flavour, that's coming from those first fill bourbon casks that we're using. So bottled at 46%. Needless to say, no colours, no caramels, no chill filtration. Trying to create something that's just tasty, really.
And it sure is. It's absolutely beautiful stuff. Just going to read a few of these notes. Stuart McGregor visited Filey Bay Distillery a couple of years ago. Well worth it. Great stories and great whiskey. Ali C, old school foam banana sweets on the nose. Anthony Mullins, my brother went on a tour there the other week and sent me a tasting set. So I'm currently using my Filey Bay nose and glass to try this one. Wonderful.
That's mine.
Peter Gilmore, fresh peaches and creamy to the nose. Stuart McGregor, sweet flambe bananas on the nose, vanilla bread. Steve Coleman Williams, lots of sharp fruits, gooseberries, rhubarb and toffee. The sweetness all on the nose. Neil Bolton, banana bread is spot on. Peter Gilmore, yeah, a hint of banana bread. Green tea is green. I'd eat more banana bread if it tasted like this. Malcolm Tucker, nose after the banana foam sweets. I'm getting hot buttered toast and green apple peel. Stu McGregor, wow, sweet fruit bread and butter pudding on the palate. We had loads of notes for this one. Saltai, big fan of the Filey Bay Distillery, really enjoyed the Moscatel, and tonight is a lovely, gentle sip. Talking of that, so you've got other bottles behind you as well, just other releases as well. So you have been working with different finishes as well. So like Moscatel, and there have been others in the range. What kind of, are there more in like the kind of the core range that we can see?
Well, it's been a bit of an evolution, as I said, because we're not, we don't have a board of directors. There's my MD Dave, and there's Tom's daughter as a marketing director. There's Joe as a whiskey director. We're a team of about 10. We can be quite light on our feet and sometimes quite reactive. So when I first started here, the core was really the flagship, the Moscatel finish and the STR finish. What we've found is actually there's a slight demand and supply issue now. So things are going quite quickly. In November, we released a port finish, batch 1 port finish, nearly 2 years in ruby port casks. That's now gone. And so we're kind of rotating the finishes as a way of create, I suppose, a range, a brand. The idea of the flagship is that it's the foundation from which the finishes are built. But yeah, Moscatel finish, STR finish. We'll shortly have a peated finish using Islay peated whiskey casks. So rather than peating any barley, there's no peat here in North Yorkshire. There's nowhere in Yorkshire that has peat, actually, that's not protected by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. So we finish in peated whiskey casks. And then we've got an IPA finish as well, quite uniquely, doing a little bit of cask sharing with our sister company, Woldtop Brewery. So yeah, the finishing will be the style, I think, and then special release using, that's where Joe, our whiskey maker, can flex his guns and show off some of the fully pheno matured whiskies we've got, or Pedro Jimenez or Oloroso casks that we've got, or indeed virgin oak finishing too.
That's really cool. So this is like the absolute representation, this one, of what the distillery stands for, that absolute house character that we've been talking about, that wonderful, the light, the fruitiness, and this is what it represents, the Filey Bay whiskey. And that's what most people are getting. These banana notes seem to be the absolute common ground. The LEC palette, I'm almost getting a mix of malt loaf and banana bread, but with a hint of hot candy ginger root. Steve Coleman Williams, really nice to hear about the farming strategy, etc., especially this time of the year. Hopefully hedgerows and edges are left intact too. Chris Leonard, spicy and sweet, has a nice creamy film group. Fruity says, I'm not going to be able to read all of these. There's just so much coming through. Real Boinga, the finish is pepper, warmth and custard. Malcolm Tucker, palette, apple crumble laden with oats and demerara sugar, crystals like black pepper, cinnamon on the finish. Greg Buick, this is an intriguing dram. I was getting ginger more than anything else on the nose, but apple crumble coming through on the palate. And Saltire is saying, peated Filey Bay, be still my heart and liver. So that's something. Watch this space. When can we be expecting that? Is that something that?
Well, that's a subject of controversy in the distillery at this point. As soon as possible is the accurate answer as soon as possible. Touch wood, and I do have an oak barrel in front of me. Touch wood, early July, late June, early July for the peated finish batch 3.
Awesome, because that does sound absolutely lovely. And I mean, like you were saying as well about the fact that, you know, you're not held to the regulations under Scotch whisky. Are there any plans to do anything kind of crazy to kind of flex those guns that you're not under those regulations?
It's a really interesting question, and that as a subject across the English whisky scene is huge at the moment. I'll go back to the initial point of we respect tradition whilst doing things our own way. So it makes sense that our wash is made at the brewery who've got actually celebrating their 20th birthday this year. They've got more experience of making wash and fermenting and yeast types and lengths of fermentation than we have. It makes sense to do that. It makes sense to use the rectifying column in the way we do. Will we be putting some new make spirit in a balsa wood cask for a month? No. You know, we will always mature in oak. We will always mature for that minimum years. With respect, and I'm perhaps speaking a little bit from my own point of view rather than necessarily the company's, I don't know whether David or Tom agrees, where I like Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery and Filey Bay to be, I want to be rubbing shoulders with Macallan, Annandale, Craigellachie. You know, for me, we make world-class single malt whiskey, all with our own raw materials, which we're very proud of, as you can tell. But I don't really like the idea of us categorising ourselves in a certain country. You know, we make really good whiskey, and we're very proud of that. And so it's hard enough as an English whiskey in a Scotch market, predominantly a Scotch market, without it being matured in a balsa wood cask for 6 months. Andy, you know, we respect tradition, but we do things our own way. That's the best way to describe it.
That's great. And also, when can we be first expecting the first age statement to be released?
Again, another subject of interest. I suspect do an age statement. I suspect it will be a 10-year. You know, we've got 7-year-old stock now. We've got about 4,000 casks maturing in the warehouse in the secret location in North Yorkshire. It's definitely not at our farm, Andy. We will probably do an age statement to celebrate age. I, personally speaking, hope it will be a single cask and it will be a balloted product. I like the fact that we celebrate the fermentation, the distillation, the decisions you make in producing whiskey, not just the barrel and how long it's been in the cask. You know, that's so for me. I like the fact that our core flagship will be forever a non-age statement, but that's not my decision. The decision comes to the owners.
These are views of personal views. They're not the views of the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery, but who knows? I'm sure you're, you know.
I suspect so. I suspect we'll have an age statement at one day. If we don't, I'll be quite blown away. Yeah.
Well, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, Morgan. This is an absolutely wonderful dram. Perfect for tonight, I have to say, in this type of heat. It just feels right having this dram. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we can get you back for that peated cask finish when it's ready for one of the
Absolutely.
pours. That would be great.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Right. This is flying past tonight, I have to say. And I've got to be honest with you, this whiskey is doing absolute wonders for my cold. So it's amazing how my cold seems to have disappeared now, which is amazing. So I'm going to bring on our next guest, and last but not least, from Craigellachie, and that is Matthew. So welcome, Matthew. How are you?
I'm very well, Andy. Thank you so much for having us on.
You are very welcome. And what's going on? How have you been? Good week so far?
Great week. It has been stunning weather here in Edinburgh for the last wee while. So we say in Scotland there's 2 seasons. There's winter and there's June. So summer is very much here. Hopefully it will last the full month. Time will tell.
Yeah, awesome. So let's start again. Like I always think it's interesting, you know, just random face on screen. Talk to us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the industry, into your current role.
Of course, yeah, it'd be my pleasure. I'm lucky enough, I'm going to be very biased with how I talk about this next whiskey, as it also happens to be my hometown. So I'm from Craigellachie in Speyside, the single malt whiskey capital of the world, of course, there. So I was kind of always destined, I suppose, in many ways to end up in whiskey. Didn't think growing up I wanted to be in whiskey at all. Went off to study classical music at university. But of course, if you're a student from Speyside, you come back in the summer, you need a summer holiday job. Where are you going to work? In a distillery as a tour guide. So started off working in Glenlivet, in fact, was my first distillery. A tour guide up there. I loved it. I never thought I wanted to work in whiskey, but I think working as a tour guide, you just realize how many people come from all over the world to see your villages and learn about your whiskey. So it was an eye opener, and from there I was hooked. I absolutely love learning about the history of whiskey and showing folks around the distillery. So yeah, from there, Chivas Brothers, who I was working for at the time, lucky enough that they had just started a graduate program. So when I finished my studies, into a graduate program there, and drew the short straw, got sent out to some terrible countries, ended up in Miami for a year, which I can tell you, coming from a village of 600 people in the north of Scotland, moving into an apartment on a South Beach in your early 20s was definitely an eye-opener as well. Had a lot of
That's
fun
a
there.
culture shock.
It was a culture shock and a half, I'll tell you. It was a lot of fun. And then from there, got sent out to South Africa for a year, based out of Cape Town. So very lucky to kind of see how different, a whiskey can look around different countries in the world. But I was desperate to get home as well. I had a long-suffering girlfriend who's now my wife. I always said I'd come back to Scotland when I could. And this amazing job popped up based in the Aberfeldy distillery, which of course is part of the John Dewars and Sons group, of course, also the owners of Craigellachie. And I'll never forget my first visit to Aberfeldy in particular. I said we'd already visited a few distilleries. Now, my wife, she doesn't mind going around one or two distilleries, but 5 or 6 is maybe pushing it. This was definitely about 6 or 7 on this trip. I'd managed to wangle a few in. And I noticed Aberfeldy was on the way home, from being up in Speyside, heading back down to Edinburgh. I said, 20 minutes tops. We'll pop in, really quick visit, 20 minutes and we'll be out of there. 4 hours later, I was still in Aberfeldy. I got sucked into the history and the wonderful museum section they have there. I know we're not here to talk about Aberfeldy tonight, but anyone who's not been watching on this call, stopping at the visitor centre is an absolute must if you're a whiskey fan. And so when the job came up to be brand homes ambassador based out of Aberfeldy, but of course I got to cover Craigellachie distillery for kind of special visits as well. I jumped at the chance, and that was a couple of years in the tour team there, kind of looking after special visits. And that has been now 3 years, coming on 3 years as global brand ambassador. I still feel like a charlatan saying that's been 3 years as a global brand ambassador, though, as the others have talked about. I literally signed my papers beginning of March 2020 to sign up as a global brand ambassador. Got this lovely brand new passport with extra pages, ready to go. Didn't need it much for the first couple of years. So it's been not the best timing for a global role, but I'll tell you now, I've made up for it. It's been a great last year. There was a good few countries, and great to get out to see some of our whiskey fans around the world. And I think we've got 5 great distilleries within the company, of course: Altmore, Royal Braclaw, Forgotten Child, Macduff Distillery, of course, which makes the Devon, Aberfeldy. But I think the one that has the real nerds, the real kind of cult following for us, is Craigellachie. So I cannot wait to talk about that one tonight.
What a segue that is. You've done this before. So talk to us about Craigellachie.
As if by magic, right? We're here now. We're on to Craigellachie. So I'd love to give you a little history lesson, just like the last 2 lads have done tonight as well. And I think Craigellachie, again, just has this fantastic history. I can't remember quite who coined the term. It's a journalist, I think, once referred to us as the bad boy of Speyside, right? We are not your typical Speyside whiskey. I know we have some probably people who are absolute whiskey nerds in this call, and maybe some people, it's their first time, maybe first sort of dram pack as well. So for anyone who's newer to whiskey, I think Speyside for me, again, and I'm very biased, it being the single malt capital of the world, has almost, well over a third to maybe almost half of kind of Scotland's distilleries sitting up there today. It is thought of by today's standards as being this lovely light, clean, kind of fruity, grassy character, right? I think some of the biggest names in single malt happen to be from Speyside. Craigellachie is not that, and I think that's why it kind of earned itself that nickname. And for me, it's old school Speyside, right? And this is the best way, I think, to kind of start going into the history. We had the ultimate nerd of his era, a man called Alfred Bernard, who wrote this book called The Whisky Distilleries of the United Kingdom, where he travelled around all of the distilleries, wrote an incredibly detailed book on his visit and kind of his thoughts. I guarantee you nobody has ever read that cover to cover. If you're struggling to get to bed at night, that is one to read. You'll be down in a minute, right? It's heavy going, shall we say. I will say, though, it does give a great snapshot of whiskey at that time. And we don't have a date to his visit to Craigellachie exactly, but he does mention they've just built the hotel. So we date it roughly as 1893. And bearing in mind the distillery was just built there in 1891. So it's kind of within the first few years of, the distillery being up and running. And he comments that, this is a fairly new distillery, but they've chosen to go with very old-fashioned methods of making whiskey. And he said it was, a style seldom met with now in that day in 1893, and it reminded him of the old Speyside style. So take a second to think about that, right? This is a guy in 1893 saying, hey, this is like an old school Speyside whiskey. I think we've kind of stuck to our guns with that. I'm not saying production methods haven't changed, because there definitely have been expansions at the distillery over the years. But I think what we've tried to keep true to is that style of whiskey making. And we're so lucky with the team we have there, right? Coming from the village, I'm very lucky. I know pretty much all the guys who work in the stills there. One of the most famous families there are the Nichols. So we've got a guy who works there today called Young Jim. Young Jim is early 50s at the moment. We still call him Young Jim because his dad worked there before. His dad was Old Jim. So you've got young James Arthur Nichol. I say young Jim. Don't have a go at me, Jim, there. I've just given away your age. Old Jim, good bit older as well, still lives next door to the distillery. So old James Arthur Nichol. His dad worked in the distillery. Now, his dad was Henry Nichol, but Henry's brother, so old Jim's uncle, also worked in the distillery. Also, again, another James Arthur Nichol. And then both of their dad worked in the distillery as well. Any guesses to anyone listening what his name might have been? Any guesses at all? Andy, what do you reckon his name was?
Old Nichol.
It's Bob. Nah, I'm joking. It's James Arthur Nichol, right? So we've got our fourth James Arthur Nichol, our fourth generation of father to son. And that first James Arthur Nichol started working there in 1918. So right in with that first generation of guys ever to work our stills.
Wow.
And we still have that James Arthur Nichol working there to this day. That is just one example of several families who've worked for generations through our stills. And talking about tropical notes, I know with the last whiskey there, we're talking about these lovely tropical notes, and pineapple being one of them. When you get onto the whiskey, if you haven't already kind of poured it into that glass and started having a little taste, I think one of the first things you're kind of hit with any Craigellachie is a little bit of pineapple. And I think it's fantastic, taking it back to where we started there with Alfred Bernard, when he wrote about his visit, one of the flavor notes he called out with our new make spirit was this lovely note to pineapple as well. So, this is a guy visiting in 1893, talking about pineapple. And I think as soon as you pick up a glass of Craigellachie today, you're still hit with that same note, right? So we've been considered old fashioned since 1891. We always say that. I think that's a bit of an inside joke because, I know we were built in 1891. So what we're saying is we've always been old school. And for me, Craigellachie really is this kind of rock of Speyside, right? Our name Craigellachie literally would translate, roughly in the Gaelic from a village kind of built on this rocky hill. So geographically, we are the rock of Speyside, built up in this rock right at the heart of Speyside. But I think from a flavour perspective, we are the rock of Speyside, right? Other Speyside distilleries have moved on through the years. We are old school, we are stubborn in our way of doing things, right? I think that is our character. That for me is Craigellachie.
And you're sticking by it, and you'll be old fashioned until the day Craigellachie is not standing anymore.
Which will be a very long time.
Hopefully never happen. This is doing no good for me, and this is the worst tasting note you're ever about to hear. And talking of old fashioned, this is not old fashioned. I recently quit vaping, and very recently, and I'm very struggling at the moment. But my favorite vape was the pineapple ice.
Okay.
And the first thing I got on the nose when I put my nose into that glass and you said the words pineapple was that note, and that's done me no good. So if I do restart the vaping habit, it's Craigellachie's fault.
I think it's going to get worse than that as well, because you're saying about vaping, there's a smoky note in there as well, right? And I think it comes right back to what we do in the distillery here. And I wouldn't describe us as a peated whiskey, right? We're definitely not. There's a token gesture of peat maybe in there in the maltings, but nothing serious at all. For Craigellachie, what we do inside the distillery, I think it's all to do with our relationship with sulfur, right? And I think most distilleries really look to lose as much sulfur as they can throughout the process. Naturally, barley even coming into any distillery is going to retain a certain amount of sulfur, so they'll kind of look to get rid of it. We look to retain kind of as much sulfur as we can throughout our process, and I guess the two kind of most obvious places where that might happen is during our distillation itself. We have these beautiful, big, domed, kind of rounded copper pot stills, and we run them quite hot and quite fast. So you're getting a lot of vapor coming through there quite quickly. And then once you get off the top of our stills along that lie pipe at the top, where you would expect to see a shell and tube condenser coming off the end there, ours are missing. And that pipe just goes out a big hole in the wall. Because, of course, we are one of only 20 distilleries at the moment in Scotland still using that kind of old-fashioned worm tub condenser. Now, for anyone who is new to whiskey, listening along in this pour and sip session thinking, what on earth is a worm tub condenser?
Well, we definitely need a refresher, because we had our very own Dave Worthington talking when we had the Boutique Whiskey Company talking about our worm tub dram, basically, which was literally the celebration. So please give us the reminder for anyone who wasn't at that, what a worm tub is and how it affects
anyone who missed that. The thing to know in Scotland, we are not great at naming things. We literally name it how we see it. And I always remember, again, young Jim was asked on camera, Jim, why is it called a worm tub? And he said in a very Doric, Northeast Scots accent, I didn't ken what they mean. There's a worm and there's a tub. What else would we call it, right? So that sums it up for me. There's a worm and there's a tub. We call it a worm tub, right? So literally that worm is that big snaking kind of copper coil kind of moving through a big tub, a big container of cold water. I don't like to name other distilleries on this, but if you've been driving up the A9 and you've gone past Dalwhinnie, that's the one I think everyone thinks of, the worm tubs, those lovely big kind of wooden vessels sitting on the outside of the distillery. Again, big tub of cold water, lovely big pipe circling through. And although you might think, well, surely there's a lot of copper contact in there, so you're going to be stripping out loads of the sort of heavier notes from the spirit. Although it's quite a large space to start with, again, compared to a shell and tube condenser, right? You go over like 100 little kind of cold water pipes running through that very compact space with lots of copper contact. A shell and tube is going to draw a lot of those heavier elements out into the copper. So think of the worm tub as the opposite, right? Less copper contact equals kind of a heavier style of spirit there. So not only do we have worm tubs, we run them quite slow and quite cold. And in fact, there's almost like a layer of film will develop over time within that worm as well. So it buffers it even more from kind of that copper contact. So for me, that's Craigellachie in a nutshell. It's thinking about that relationship with sulfur, really trying to keep as much of that sulfur kind of coming through as we can. And at the same time, with our worm tubs, again, that lovely kind of slow, old school style, it gives it that kind of meatiness. We talked about viscosity. The last two guys have talked about viscosity. I think it gives us this lovely kind of rich viscosity to our whiskey as well. Some people refer to Craigellachie as being almost a little bit meaty in its character. It's quite robust. We are pretty unusual in that sort of style. And I always think Craigellachie, whatever dram you're having, it's this almost contradiction in a glass, because you have that classic, or I say classic, modern classic, as we all know now, Speyside style, right, with that kind of tropical, kind of lighter fruity notes. But then you've got that kind of balance out with those kind of more meaty, kind of sulfury kind of notes in there. Our malt master, Stephanie, she quite often refers to it as almost like cordite. Now, anyone who doesn't know what that is, imagine Scotland on bonfire night. It's probably raining. So you've got a bit of a drizzle and you've got kind of fireworks going off. So it's kind of like almost a wet gunpowder. So it's this quite unusual kind of note as well, but makes a very distinctive dram. I'd love to see, again, I can't wait to hear what the tasting notes are for this one. Is there a few coming through already?
There are tons coming through. I would say that that we should just talk about the dram first. So this is the 13-year-old Bas-Armagnac cask finish.
It is indeed so.
Probably talk to us first about Bas-Armagnac.
So Armagnac, for a start, for me, I think of it as almost a cooler, kind of more old school cousin to something like your brandies or your cognacs as well, right? Armagnac is this kind of old school, small scale kind of production as well. So when it's, again, once they've harvested, again, when they're putting it through distillation, they quite often have traveling stills. Now, forgive my Scottish accent here. I've had to write this one down phonetically because I knew I was going to have to say it. And as Scots, German we can handle. It's quite a guttural sound. French is definitely not one for a Scot. So I believe, again, anyone who's French here in the Pour and Sip listening along, you can rate me out of 10. Let's see. I'll put myself in the line here for this one. So something like an Armagnac, I think something like that for the type of still, which is almost this continuous still. It's quite often wood-fired and portable as well, and it kind of gets taken around sometimes on the back of a tractor trailer or horse and cart kind of thing, right? So old school style cognac. Think of it kind of in that way.
Old school
Easiest way to
Craigellachie with
describe,
old school
I
cognac.
think, Armagnac, right? And I think because, again, they're not making the cuts in the same way, quite often it can be kind of the whole run. It can be quite a fiery, earthy kind of young spirit. And when they put it into that kind of French wood over time, and you can spend, you know, decades sometimes in wood with Armagnacs. I've only recently got into Armagnac kind of with this project, and I'll say, bang for your buck, Armagnac for aged Armagnac is exceptional. Definitely one for people to look into. But it's a really interesting, I think, you know, the younger ones will say quite a fiery kind of earthy spirit. But as it kind of gets time in the wood there, in that French wood, it really mellows out. And I've got to say, we fell in love with Armagnac straight away. Being Craigellachie, I've just told you we like old school things, and you know, and a bit weird and a bit rugged and fiery. Armagnac is almost that equivalent, right? I think for balancing out, and really this whole kind of pursuit with the Armagnac edition. So we have a kind of a normal 13. You can see that kind of in the middle, hopefully behind my head there, that lovely kind of yellowy one there. That's our kind of core range 13, the one that's, you know, been available since we launched the kind of range in 2015. And for me, that's that, again, balance. We're using a combination of casks there, some refill, rechar, both bourbon and sherry, combine the casks together and finish it for about 6 months, kind of 50-50, first fill bourbon, first fill sherry. So that's kind of original 13. We always talked about being one of, you know, X amount of distilleries to use worm tubs in Scotland. And actually this was born out of a geeky conversation in the team where we said, we always give that kind of number, but I wonder how many worm tubs there actually are, you know, which other industries are using worm tubs. And we thought, how on earth do we find this out? You know, do we go to loads of different spirits producers and say, do you use worm tubs? And then I happened to say, well, actually, why don't I just give Richard Forsyth a shout? Because probably he makes a lot of these worm tubs, right, for around the world. So I had a great conversation with Richard Forsyth Jr. And he said, oh, there's all of these guys we kind of make worm tubs for. So put us on to Armagnac kind of being one of them. As I say, we fell in love with it. So the 13-year-old Armagnac was released last March, kind of last year in 2022. And the plan for it is to be kind of one of the first in a series of kind of a horizontal range of Craigellachie 13 years old, sort of celebrating people who love worm tubs as much as we do at Craigellachie. So this is hopefully the first of what will be several releases in kind of this horizontal range. As I say, and with Craigellachie, we always believe it's about, you know, sharing the rare. So I think we wanted to do something interesting at 13 years old, right at the kind of entry point for us, rather than just with the kind of old and expensive, you know, super expensive stuff. We thought we'll do it with kind of the welcome to the family, if you like. So I think it's a very Craigellachie move, if you ask me.
Okay, cool. That's super interesting. So let's read some of the tasting notes that are coming through. I see Colin Williams has already said, now this is one I've been waiting for. So I'm looking forward to hearing your notes, Steve, when they come in. Now, here you go. Raspberry caramel and a hit in the face of spring pollen without the evilness of hay fever. Now, this is a spring whiskey. So there you go.
Love it. And, you know, a very contradicting flavors coming together that sound like they shouldn't go together, but just make something incredibly special. You know, and for me, Craigellachie is that contradiction in a glass, right? These really opposing flavors that just somehow work well together. I'll say our malt master had a little different sort of taste notes to you there, but I definitely would say you're spot on with some of those. So Stephanie McLeod, our malt master, again, for this whiskey now. Anyone who's not familiar with Stephanie McLeod, she's the malt master for our company, and she is 4-time winner of Master Blender of the Year now. Literally won it for the last 4 years running. It must be one of the most highly regarded whiskey makers in the world, but at the same time, one of the most humble people you will ever meet. She always needs me there as her hype man, you know, anywhere she goes to actually just point out how great she is, because she would never say it herself, you know. But so when she's putting a whiskey together, you know you're in safe hands. And I think this was quite a different one as well. So I mentioned with the original 13, obviously we used some both bourbon and sherry casks in there, kind of some first fill, refill. Initial maturation for the 13 here, for those sort of 12 years or so, we're using just refill and rechar American oak casks here, so ex-bourbon casks. and then it's for just usually over a year. At the moment we found that's kind of how long it needed for finishing in that Bas-Armagnac cask. So some of the wonderful notes that she's come up with here, it was almost like a caramel shortcake, which I think is my favorite. So we had some lovely kind of sweet notes in that tasting note there as well. So you've got that kind of caramel coming through, I think, with some of those lovely kind of sweet cereals. I think you still got a lot of that kind of lovely barley cereal notes coming in as well. But there's baked notes, right, as well. It's that smokiness coming through. But any other thoughts? Again, I'm sure there's a few coming through here.
Anthony Mullins is saying that he's getting that really buttery almond croissant note on the nose. So it's like the kind of the patisserie note. Just saying, real boinga, black cherries and cream on the nose, very rounded. Green tea is green, raspberry, strawberry cream on my nose, morphing a little to Bakewell tart. Real boinga, the butter does really come out after a bit. Steve Coleman Williams, oh my days, just don't put this in your mouth, send it my way instead, it's wonderful. Clive Hampton, really creamy, buttery taste and lots of spice. Malcolm Tucker knows I get mango, powdered oatmeal almond. Neil Bolton, this is gorgeous. Green tea is green. Well done, Andy, for giving up vaping. I've not succeeded just yet. It's been a week, but you know, it's been tough. I'm just put it that way. It's probably why I've got a cold. Ali C, tropical fruit juices on the nose into Solero ice lolly. That's a great shout. With a peppery, spicy hit on the finish. Definite hints of pineapple and mango. Real boinga, the taste, berries, raspberries, and red currant with a honeyed syrup and some spice. Anthony Mullins, wow, sweet and spice in perfect harmony. Andy can't ask the usual question this week. I can and I will. So Satya is saying palate fruity but not spice for me. Probably the first I've been able to make a distinction in that hint of smoke without being peated. Ian Turner, all drams 46% so far, and they've got warmer, spicier on the palate. That may be just after a few. Malcolm Tucker palate, I'm getting the fat from roast beef joints, followed by tobacco and black pepper finish with lemon curds. Okay, that is really interesting.
I love it, and I think we've got some malt masters in the making there with those kind of tasting notes, right? It's but hopefully anyone who maybe doesn't have the dram in front of them who's watching this back on YouTube, they're going to be thinking, what on earth is this dram, right? Hopefully that's driven you to try it. But it's almost these two kind of flavor camps, right? Everything everyone said there was kind of a meatiness, the kind of fattiness there, something quite rich and quite savory. Then there's a lot of those kind of pastried, sort of sweet sugar notes in there as well. And it's just such an intriguing dram, and I think such an intriguing distillery. But again, I'm a little biased being the ambassador and it being the hometown, but one well worth a try, right?
I absolutely love it. I have to say, I think it's absolutely amazing. I always love there is that wonderful contradiction there, the juxtaposition between the sweet and the savoury notes, that kind of meaty character of the Craigellachie mixed in with that beautiful kind of pineapple tropical note, and the notes we get from the Armagnac. It's wonderful stuff. And real boinga, as a native French speaker, has given you 8 out of 10. You just didn't do the R. The big difference between cognac and Armagnac is that Armagnac is distilled only once. That's what I was told by the cognac people. Malcolm Tucker, funny, I was reading about 4 sides of Rother's Coppersmiths this afternoon. Real Boing is telling me that cognac is preferred by the Brits because Armagnac is comparatively very cheap.
I mean, as a Scot, I can't disagree with that. Any more money in our pockets, never a bad thing.
Absolutely. Clive Hampton, all 3 very good whiskies with different characteristics and flavours, very enjoyable, and I'm an Isla fan. So yeah, that's beating me well ahead of the question tonight. So that is absolutely wonderful stuff. So what's in the future of this range? We were slightly discussing about more cask finishes, or just there more stuff from this particular journey. I
mean, watch this space. I think, with someone like Stephanie McLeod at the helm, and she has a wonderful team, with her as well. She is just experimenting with the weird and the wonderful, loads of different wine casks, kind of across our company. As I mentioned, we are looking into other things, other spirits that we, of course, can legally use within the Scotch Whisky Association guidelines. That also love worm tubs as well. So we are limited to some capacity with what we can do, but we are exploring pretty much all of that as well. So I'll definitely say watch this space. I don't know when it'll be coming because we're definitely in trials with a few things. We must have one of the busiest research and development teams, I think, in Scotch whisky as well. So we do. I'm very lucky. I get to see a lot of things, but you never know quite when they're going to come to light. So all I can say safely is there's loads of exciting things in the pipeline watch Craigellachie, watch this space.
Loads of exciting new but old school and old fashioned things coming out.
I should say it's traditionally kind of bottled, again, in line with what everyone said there. Everything we produce at Craigellachie is 46% ABV or higher. It's all natural colour. It's all non-chill filtered.
Good.
And it usually has a weird number on it as well. That's why I told you we're stubborn, right? So as I say, 13, we have a 17. I'm delighted to say we have just brought back, or coming back at the moment, the Craigellachie 19 and 23-year-old. A lot of people thought we discontinued those, but I always said to them, we've not discontinued them. We just haven't made a batch in a long time. And that's the thing with Craigellachie. You know, we're not the biggest distillery in the scheme of things. We have to kind of watch our kind of pockets of liquid as it ages through as well. So I'm delighted to say for all those massive Craigellachie fans, those are coming back very, very soon, if they haven't already hit some of your shelves as well. So one to watch the space. The Craigellachie 23 always used to say was like hen's teeth. A good Scottish joke there. Rare. You don't see it very often.
Hen's teeth. Okay. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, Matt. That's absolutely lovely stuff. That's a wonderful dram, I have to say. Thank you very much. So I've got another couple of drams. If you want to stick around to the end, and I'll invite you and Ben back on, and we'll just have a little quick chat while I ask everyone what their favourite drams were. Please stick around. But thank you very much.
I'll hang around. Cheers, Andy.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Right. Wonderful stuff listening to all these amazing guests talk about amazing whiskey. So I think I should just quickly, briefly talk about the other two drams. So we're just going to start off with the Wolfburn. Now, like I said before, you do not have to drink these in their entirety because, 5 grams over the course of the night is quite a lot. So feel free to just listen to me blabber on about this and have a little sniff or something, and you might want to save it for tomorrow. So this is Wolfburn 10, and this is a special release, as it's the first age statement whiskey from Wolfburn. Now, the original distillery dates back to 1821, and it closed its doors in the 19th century until this current version, which was founded in 2013. And it's now the most northerly distillery in mainland Scotland, and it's situated just 350 metres from the original site. This 10-year-old spent a decade's worth of maturation entirely in second fill Oloroso sherry, seasoned Spanish oak hogshead. So it's very different from the usual kind of bourbon forward releases that they've got at the Wolfburn distillery. So this is a really exciting one. I've not tried much, I have to be honest, of Wolfburn. So I can't give you too many notes. It would be interesting to see what you guys think of it going forward. So that is the Wolfburn 10. Now, the next dram that we have, we were talking with Matt about Speyside drams that are possibly heavy, meaty, full-bodied, not the kind of aromatic, light, fruity ones. And I suppose, along with Craigellachie, this other one, Macallan, is also one that has this, is very famous for that particular very meaty, full-bodied note. So it's kind of crazy to think about how popular Macallan has become. And I suppose in whiskey circles, there's lots of debate about where it is now as a brand, as it's sold out, blah, 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 blah. But regardless of that, it's very popular. So whatever you think, it's extremely popular. And, it's crazy to think that since it's become legal, and that was about in 1824, that before the 1980s, until the 1980s, it was only mainly used for blends and not single malt. So it's kind of crazy to think how far it's come. Maybe is the most famous name in Speyside whiskies in the world. So sorry about that, Matt. But it does cause quite a lot of debate. And when we think of Macallan, we think of those super small stills, which are some of the smallest in the Scotch whisky industry. And these super short, squat nature kind of maximizes the contact of the spirit with the copper, helping to kind of concentrate that new make spirit. And this full-bodied nature and the spirit ensures that they can mature the whiskies for a long time, meaning the spirit has longer time to soak up all those intricate flavors from the oak cask. And this plays a huge part in that kind of meaty Macallan style that we see. Now, this is the 12-year-old, and it's part of the double cask range, and it's a blend of sherry seasoned American and European oak casks. So again, my views on Macallan, I don't try that much Macallan, if I'm completely honest. I think this is one of the better ones to try. Obviously, and it's a really, really nice dram, a classic sherried Macallan. And if you like that, this is wonderful stuff. I always get that very leathery note from Macallan that comes through from me, very meaty, which is kind of those notes that I tend to like. So yes, if you like Macallan, I'm sure you're going to absolutely love this. Malcolm Tucker is saying, similarly, Macallan's slightly disappointed. He was expecting more. Nose, honey, peach blossom, pears, and crunchy, is that crunchy bar? Palate, woody tobacco, marmalade, black pepper, and finished pecan pie. Malcolm Tucker's also tasted the Wolfburn, and his notes were tangerines, raspberries, bird custard, wisp of smoke on the nose, palate, pan au chocolat, smothered in bramble jelly, cinnamon and cloves, spice finish, smoke with more jam. Wonderful notes there, Macallan. Malcolm, I have to say. Your Uncle Vanya, I've jumped on Wolfburn already, loved them and loved this dram too. Decisions. And your Uncle Vanya, we've opened all the Macallan folios in the James Bond series just to check if it's worth the thousands. You can tell what our answer is. And Stuart McGregor, really disappointed Macallan stopped the 10-year-old. It was a great entry-level whiskey for anyone to try. Absolutely. I didn't even realise they'd stopped the 10-year-old. So there you go. So two absolutely amazing whiskies there to try at the end of our tasting session. I'm just going to invite Matt and Ben back onto the stage, as it were. How's it going, guys?
All good here. Just drop a water into that Craigellachie and it's just blossomed.
Ben, it feels like forever since I saw you, to be honest with you. You're on mute.
My bad.
It's a 2020, right? That's it.
I know. I thought we'd gotten over these issues, with plenty of training. But I've just been sitting in the background, enjoying everything that Morgan has said, and of course, obviously Matthew has said. And it's been great, fantastic chat and banter and educational for everyone involved. I mean, I don't know how the people at home feel about it, but yeah, I mean, fantastic evening. I have moved on to Annandale, our actual stuff. And it's been fantastic. It's going really well.
That's good. Matt, do you have any opinions on Macallan? You can't say.
I'd never heard of them before, to be honest. It's amazing you bring them up. No, it's we're literally just across the river from each other.
Exactly it.
And I think it's a great example you're saying. I love that you've got both of them in the packs tonight, because it just shows it's not only about where you are in Scotland, it's also about the kind of equipment that you're using in the distillery, how you're choosing to run it, to completely different styles of whiskey, about a mile apart from each other, literally sitting the other side of the River Spey from each other. So my folks still live in the village up in Craigellachie, and we literally look out our windows over to Macallan Distillery. So it's one I am fairly familiar with in my time there. But as I say, very biased. This Speyside ram hopefully will become the most famous name in Speyside if we do our job right here. Craigellachie, one to watch.
No, too old-fashioned for that. You're not going to build some brand spanking new visitor centre like they have over there. Way too old-fashioned for that.
I mean, on that, we don't have a visitor centre, and I don't know if we ever will. So
there you go.
This is normally a question I'm always asked. For anyone who does want to visit, the only time of year I can guarantee, well, not even guarantee, but suggest that you might be able to get in is the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival. So for anyone who's listened along tonight and is thinking, I would love to get round to see this old school Speyside show, Ben, I'm sure we can sort something out for you there, pal. Watch out for tickets at Spirit of Speyside. As I say, normally it's between 2 and 4 days, depending on kind of what our plans are over the festival. But that is the only way you're going to get round to see us. But as I say, very biased. Well worth a look.
Awesome. Guys, you're already answering the question for me. I barely said it, but please do let me know what your favourite from this box has been tonight. So let me know what dram is really tickling your fancy, which one you've liked the most, and you're going to be heading to that pour and sip store and pressing the purchase button, or are you going to be purchasing more than one? I can see a few of you here are already saying that, so I'll let your comments come in on that just as a wrap up. Matt, is there anything you've tried recently that's not Craigellachie that's really impressed you? And Ben, I'll come to you with that question as well.
That is a good question. I mean, within our group, I do normally end up, I am quite blinkered these days to what I'm trying at the moment. I will say we've had some cracking Royal Bracklas recently as well. I think the other favourite, Royal Brackla 18, for anyone who wants to look at cool new kind of or casks that you maybe don't see so often. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Palo Cortado. Now, I've moved from French to Spanish, also not another good one for the Scots in pronunciation, but Palo Cortado, or something like that, right? Which, of course, is that really unusual, again, quite rare sherry cask.
We had, who was it on here? Because we've had everyone, but I did a finish in Palo. Was it Deanston? Maybe. Can't remember. We have spoken about it at length here.
A few now, right? I think it's starting to kind of get out a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we're probably one of the only ones now with a kind of core range, kind of ready available expression, which is our 18-year-old now. So that is the one that is just a bit of a wow factor. You know, we're coming into summer, as I mentioned, in Scotland. Well, it's here for the next week or so. That's probably the one I'm going to be sipping on as a nice kind of summer sipper. Lovely, light, fresh, grassy kind of notes in there. Definitely one if you've not tried it. Again, one to try for me.
That sounds lovely. What about you, Ben?
Well, I don't know how it's going to translate from Scottish to French, but I'll try English to French to see if that's any better. Especially Birmingham to French, I think that's even worse. But I have a particular fondness for STR red wine barrique casks. Not even predominantly STR, just many red wine casks that you can find. I've been doing I have a particular favourite with Blair Athol. They have a soft spot in my heart, especially when you get them from an independent bottler. So some of you might be familiar with the whiskey broker here down in Creetown in the south of Scotland, pretty much about 15 minutes away from Bladnoch Distillery if you're in this kind of area. And essentially they do this lovely thing where they're a warehouse, they mature things, great, fantastic, and they've got these plain, not so much nowadays, but they used to have a plain Jane bottling, and Blair Athol 10-year-old red wine barrique. It just sort of sung so many notes with me, and being diabetic, it really is a get out clause when it tastes like Haribo's and sherbets and stuff like that. So that was my journey for STR. Annandale Distillery, of course, doing what Morgan said with Jim Swan. We were also doing STR. So if anybody is out there doing an STR cask, I will send you my home address. So.
Okay. Well, I'm sure some people might take you up on that one. Those all sound really good. I'm just going to head back here, just try and find it, the beginning of this. Okay. Steve Coleman Williams, Craigellachie wins for me this evening, hands down. Neil Bolton, all three are lovely. By the way, as we all know, just should tell our guests now, the real answer is all of them, because whiskey is subjective and they are all very good. But for the purpose of this game and for the competitive nature of pour and sippers, Neil Bolton, all three lovely, but the Craig wins it for me tonight. Green tea is green, have to drop. But as before, Craigellachie top spot of the three will be interested in the Wolfburn though. Your Uncle Vanya, if anyone has any Storyman left, doubt it, go back to it. That's a lovely development. Storyman wins for me tonight. Then Wolfburn and then Craigellachie. That's lovely when you leave your whiskey in the glass for a while and you come back to it and it's almost like a different dram, and all these new things coming up and new flavours. Ali C, Craigellachie, Wolfburn, then Filey Bay. Patsman agreed, Craigellachie, Wolfburn and Storyman in close second. Your Uncle Vanya, Spirit of Speyside was amazing. Ian Turner, Storyman for me. Stuart McGregor, Filey Bay by a whisker. Simon, Craigellachie for me tonight. Anthony Mullins, wow, what a month. Favourites, Storyman, Filey Bay, Craigellachie, Wolfburn and Macallan all in first place. There you go, that's the right answer. Best box ever. Thank you. Greg Buick, Craigellachie for me tonight. Stuart McGregor, great box, one of the best. Saying that, guys, like we've had a lot of boxes. We've been doing this since 2021, maybe, I can't remember, it's been a while. We've had a lot of boxes, put it that way, with a lot of whiskey in. So there's a lot of people saying here this has been one of the better boxes, if not the best. There's been a very high level of whiskey tonight. Pexman cracking selection this month. Clive Hampton, Filey Bay by Banana. I'll need extra time for the Wolfburn and Macallan. Steve Coleman Williams was pleasantly surprised by the Filey Bay, solid second for me. Neil Bolton, Macallan, nice, but no bite. Kick to it, feels a bit weak. Might be that chill filtration. Steve Macallan, Andy, before we go, good luck with the vaping exit. We expect updates. Also, maybe take up baking. We clearly all see you as a baker. I don't see me as a baker at all. I can't bake at all, like literally at all. But it is going well, the vaping thing. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, I'm doing well. Whiskey helps. Actually, it does. Anyway, you don't need my life story. Your Uncle Vanya, Blair Athol, Uncharted's expression is amazing too. Malcolm Tucker bought all of tonight's whiskies. So I have to choose one. It would be the Craigellachie. Malcolm Tucker, hold on. We are quite happy to vote for all, but you won't allow it, especially Jess. No, I mean, for the purpose of the game, I mean, I feel like we all have favourites, but they are all brilliant in their own way. Real Bongo, I really can't pick a favourite tonight. Peck's an expensive month. My shopping cart is filling up, and Malcolm Tucker saying we started in September 2020. Guys, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you to Matt. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Morgan. He was just so rude. He just had to rush off. No, I'm joking. He had places to be as a busy man. Thank you so much for listening. And our next Pour and Sip will be in July. Now, as always, I have forgotten the date, so I'm not going to say it, but we will see you in July. Thank you very much, as always, to our guests and for wonderful whiskey, and we hope you have an amazing week.